The day they fired me, the company started its countdown. "You're a legacy cost, Emma, a relic of a manual era." Richard Hale didn't look up from his tablet when he said it. He didn't need to. He was the senior manager of operations at Vanguard Logistics, and I was merely the woman who had kept the company's heart beating for 15 years. To Richard, I wasn't a person with institutional knowledge. I was a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be deleted to make room for his son's promotion. He spoke with the casual indifference of a man ordering a coffee, unaware that the floor beneath him was only solid because I chose to keep it that way. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even blink. I simply sat in the designer ergonomic chair that felt increasingly like a witness stand, watching the light from the afternoon sun reflect off his polished mahogany desk. "I understand, Richard," I said. My voice was a calm, steady stream, undisturbed by the gravity of his words. He finally looked up, his eyes searching mine for a flicker of fear, a tear, or a tremor of rage. He found nothing. I had spent 15 years building systems that didn't fail. I wasn't about to let my own composure be the first thing to break. "Good," he replied, his smirk returning. "I'm glad we're on the same page. Jason will be taking over the integration suite on Monday. I suggest you start packing. You have until Friday." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out. I didn't know it yet, but the clock had just started ticking on the most expensive mistake Vanguard Logistics would ever make. To understand why my departure was a death sentence for Vanguard, you have to understand the global integration mesh. Vanguard wasn't a shipping company in the traditional sense. We were the nervous system for 300 different international vendors. We didn't own the ships or the trucks. We owned the data that told the ships where to dock and the trucks what to carry. At the center of that data was a sprawling, ancient, and incredibly delicate architecture that I had built, patched, and maintained since the company was a 10-person startup in a rented warehouse. My office was on the 5th floor, tucked away from the glass and steel glamour of the executive suites. It smelled of ozone, old paper, and the specific, metallic scent of a server room that was kept 5 degrees cooler than the rest of the building. This was my kingdom. While the marketing team spent their days talking about synergy and disruption, I spent mine ensuring that a shipment of life-saving insulin didn't get stuck in a heat-mapped container in Dubai because of a decimal point error in a customs manifest. Richard Hale had joined us 2 years ago. He was a man of vision, which in corporate terms usually means someone who likes the results of work but finds the process of it beneath them. He viewed my department as a black box, a mysterious, expensive room that occasionally made noises he didn't like. He wore suits that cost more than my first car and spoke in a dialect of buzzwords that served as a substitute for actual knowledge. He began his tenure with a series of subtle, calculated humiliations. He started by moving our weekly briefings to 7 a.m. on Monday mornings, knowing I lived 40 miles away. Then he began inviting his son, Jason, to sit in on my technical reviews. Jason was 24 and possessed an MBA from a school that clearly prioritized networking over logic. He would sit in my office, leaning back in his chair with his feet dangerously close to the fiber optic cables, and ask questions that betrayed a profound lack of understanding. "Why are we still using Python for the bridge scripts, Emma?" he'd ask, checking his reflection in his phone screen. "My buddy at a fintech startup says everyone is moving to a low-code environment. It's more agile. We use these scripts because the European customs gateway operates on a legacy framework from the 90s. I would explain, my voice devoid of the exhaustion I felt. Low-code environments cannot handle the multi-factor authentication handshake required for Tier 4 security clearance. If the handshake fails, the port doors don't open." Jason would just shrug and go back to his phone. "Whatever. Sounds like a lot of manual work for something an AI could probably do in 5 seconds." I watched Daniel Brooks, the operations lead, during these exchanges. Daniel was a man who knew exactly how much the company relied on me, but he was also a man who knew which way the wind was blowing. Richard Hale was the CEO's favorite. Richard was the one who promised to cut operational costs by 20%. Daniel wanted to keep his title, so whenever Richard or Jason dismissed my expertise, Daniel would simply look at his notepad and nod. He was a man of silence, but his silence was born of cowardice, while mine was born of preparation. The microaggressions became a daily rhythm. My name would be accidentally left off email chains regarding the very systems I had designed. I would arrive at meetings to find that the agenda had been changed to focus on transitioning away from legacy dependencies, a phrase that was corporate shorthand for getting rid of Emma. The air in the office began to feel heavy. It's a specific kind of silence that falls over a workplace when everyone knows a sacrifice is being prepared. People who used to stop by my desk for a coffee and a chat now walked a little faster when they passed my cubicle. They saw the writing on the wall, and they didn't want the ink to smudge onto them. I remember a specific Tuesday in October. I was performing the monthly audit for the Hamburg terminal. It was a painstaking process of reconciling digital signatures with physical port manifests. It was tedious, but it was the only thing preventing a multi-million-dollar customs fine. Richard walked into my office without knocking. He was holding a glass of sparkling water, swirling it as if it were a fine cognac. "Still playing with your spreadsheets, Emma?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm ensuring the Hamburg shipment isn't seized, Richard," I replied without looking up. "Jason showed me his new dashboard today," Richard said, ignoring me. "Real-time analytics, cloud-based. He thinks we can automate this entire reconciliation process by the end of the quarter. Think of the savings." "Automation requires a stable API on both ends," I said, finally turning to face him. "The Hamburg port uses a rotating encryption key. If you automate the request without the physical token, their firewall will flag it as a cyber attack. We would be blacklisted from the terminal." Richard laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "You legacy people always think the world is more complicated than it is. It's a way of protecting your jobs. But Vanguard is moving forward, with or without the people who are holding us back." He left then, the scent of his expensive cologne lingering in the ozone-heavy air of my office. It was the scent of arrogance. Even Laura Mitchell, the HR director, who I had known for a decade, started treating me with a sterile, professional distance. We used to talk about our gardens and our families. Now she spoke to me as if she were reading from a legal disclaimer. The corporate machinery was turning, and I was the grit in the gears. I saw it all. I felt the shift in the corporate temperature. And I did what I always do. I prepared. I didn't sabotage. I didn't steal. I simply stopped volunteering the extra effort that made the automated systems look functional. I began to document everything, not for them, but for the inevitable day they would realize what they had lost. The process of my offboarding was a masterpiece of corporate efficiency. Richard didn't want a transition. He wanted an erasure. "We won't need a handover period," Richard told me on my final Wednesday. "Jason has been shadowing you for months. He's confident he can handle the quarterly audit next week. We've already migrated your administrative access to his profile." I looked at Jason, who was currently struggling to open a PDF on his laptop. "The quarterly audit involves a manual reconciliation of the Rotterdam manifests," I said. "The system requires a physical hardware key to bypass the firewall during the sync. Without it, the data will sit in a buffer until it eventually times out and self-deletes." Yeah, Jason said, waving a hand dismissively. "We're moving that to the cloud, Emma. No more physical keys. It's 2025. We have digital certificates for that." I didn't tell him that the cloud he kept talking about was just another server in a different building, and that the European Union didn't care what year it was. They cared about the encryption protocols they had established in 2012, protocols that required a physical RSA token for every manual handshake. "I see," I said. "Then I'll ensure my personal belongings are removed by Friday." The next 48 hours were a study in quiet, legal, and absolute withdrawal. I followed the employee handbook to the letter. Section 4.2. Upon termination, the employee shall cease all intervention, manual or automated, in company systems. For 15 years, I had been the manual intervention. When the automated billing system lagged, I ran a cleanup script. When the port APIs timed out, I manually refreshed the connection tokens. When the databases grew too bloated, I archived the logs. I was the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand that smoothed out every wrinkle before the executives could see it. I was the reason the glitch-free reputation of Vanguard existed. On Friday afternoon, I performed my final act. I didn't delete files. I didn't plant a logic bomb. I didn't change passwords. That would be sabotage, and I am a professional. Instead, I simply stopped the maintenance. Every Friday at 5 p.m., I would log into the EU Customs gateway and manually refresh the security tokens. It was a 5-minute task, but it was the only way to keep the bridge between our servers and their manifests open. The gateway was designed to reject any automated pings as a security measure against DDoS attacks. It required a human to solve a complex, rotating CAPTCHA and input a code from a physical RSA token. I took the RSA token from my desk. It was a small, gray plastic device about the size of a thumb drive. It displayed a 6-digit number that changed every 60 seconds. I had bought this device with my own budget 5 years ago when the company refused to upgrade our security suite, citing unnecessary overhead. It was technically my property, registered to my personal authentication account. I placed the token in my purse. I then went to my workstation and looked at the Apex Ship software that Jason had insisted on installing. It was a shiny, expensive piece of software that looked great in a demo, but was functionally a hollow shell. It was designed to talk to modern, API-rich systems. It had no idea how to talk to a 30-year-old Dutch customs mainframe. I didn't disable Apex Ship. I did the opposite. I enabled its auto-sync feature, just as Jason had requested in his efficiency memo earlier that week. Now, instead of waiting for a manual handshake, the software would attempt to force its way into the EU gateway every 30 seconds. Without the refreshed security tokens, the EU gateway wouldn't see a handshake. It would see a persistent, aggressive intrusion attempt from an unauthorized source. At 4:55 p.m., I logged out. I left my laptop on the desk, neatly docked. I left my company ID next to it, the plastic lanyard coiled like a sleeping snake. I walked to the elevator. The office was quiet. Most people had already left for the weekend. I saw Daniel Brooks through the glass of his office. He looked up, saw me carrying my small box of personal items, and quickly looked back down at his monitor. He didn't even wave. As I walked through the lobby, Mike, the security guard, gave me a sad smile. "Leaving early, Emma?" "Leaving for good, Mike," I said. "They're gonna miss you around here," he said, shaking his head. "They just don't know it yet." "You're right, Mike," I said, stepping out into the cool evening air. "They don't." Saturday was the most peaceful day I had experienced in a decade. I spent it in my garden, pruning the hydrangeas and feeling the sun on my neck. I didn't check my email. I didn't look at my phone. I allowed myself to simply exist as a person, not a component of a logistics network. The first fracture happened at 12:01 a.m. on Sunday. This was the moment the weekly security tokens expired. Usually, I would have refreshed them 36 hours prior. Now, they were dead. When the Apex Ship software attempted its first sync at 12:01 a.m., the EU Customs Gateway did exactly what it was programmed to do. It rejected the request. When Apex Ship tried again at 12:01 and 30 seconds, the gateway flagged the IP address. By 12:05 a.m., after 10 failed attempts, the EU Gateway's automated security protocols identified Vanguard Logistics' entire server range as a high-threat source and blacklisted it. In an instant, Vanguard became invisible to the European ports. 42 container ships, currently mid-transit across the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, suddenly had no valid manifests. To the port authorities in Rotterdam, Hamburg, and Antwerp, these ships were no longer carrying Vanguard Logistics cargo. They were carrying unidentified goods. By Sunday morning, the alerts would have been screaming on the dashboards in the Vanguard office. But it was Sunday. Jason Hale wouldn't be in the office. He would be on a golf course or at a brunch, confident that automation was doing his job for him. My phone rang at 10 a.m. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. It was the office. I didn't answer. I went back to my tea. At 11:30 a.m., my personal email pinged. It was an automated alert I had set up years ago, tied to the server's critical failure log. It was a courtesy notification I had forgotten to disable. Error 403, forbidden, IP range blacklisted, gateway connection severed. I deleted the email and went back to my book. By Sunday evening, the situation moved from a glitch to a catastrophe. The port fees for a single stalled container ship can range from $50,000 to $100,000 a day. Vanguard had 42 of them. Moreover, the contracts we held with our clients, major pharmaceutical companies, automotive manufacturers, and grocery chains, contained strict late delivery penalties. If a shipment of perishable goods stayed in a port for more than 24 hours without a manifest, the insurance was voided, and the logistics provider, Vanguard, was liable for the total value of the cargo. We were talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in liability, mounting by the hour. At 6 p.m., my phone began to vibrate almost continuously. Richard Hale, Jason Hale, Daniel Brooks, Laura Mitchell. I watched the names flash on the screen like a tally of the people who had stood by and watched me be pushed out. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and began making dinner. I made a beef bourguignon. It's a slow dish. It requires patience and attention to detail. Monday morning at Vanguard Logistics must have been a scene of pure, unadulterated panic. I can imagine it clearly. Michael Reed, the CEO, would have arrived to find his office suite crowded with frantic vice presidents. The green lights on the company dashboard would have turned a violent, pulsing red. The phones would be ringing off the hooks with calls from angry port authorities, screaming client reps, and confused ship captains. I didn't have to imagine it for long. At 9:15 a.m., there was a knock at my front door. I opened it to find Daniel Brooks. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie was crooked, and his shirt was wrinkled. He looked like a man whose world had ended between a Sunday brunch and a Monday morning. "Emma," he said, his voice cracking. "Thank God you're home." "Hello, Daniel," I said, standing firmly in the doorway. "Is there something I can help you with? I'm quite busy this morning. I was just about to start some laundry." "The system is down," he blurted out. "Everything is down. The EU gateway has blocked us. Jason tried to fix it, but he somehow managed to overwrite the integration directory with a blank template. The bridge code is gone. The backups won't load because they're looking for a security token that doesn't exist." "That sounds like a very serious technical issue," I said, my voice sympathetic but detached. "I'm sure Jason's agile low-code environment will have a solution shortly. After all, legacy systems are a thing of the past." Daniel's face fell. "Emma, please, Michael is on the phone with the board of directors. We're losing millions every hour. Richard is losing his mind. He's blaming the software, he's blaming the Dutch, he's blaming everyone." "Except himself, I imagine," I said. "Look, we need you to come in, just for an hour. Michael said to tell you that whatever your hourly rate is, we'll triple it. Just get the bridge back up. Please." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Daniel, I'm an unemployed legacy cost. I don't have an hourly rate. And as you know, my severance agreement strictly prohibits me from accessing company systems. I wouldn't want to jeopardize my legal standing. I follow the rules, Daniel. I thought that was why you liked me." "We'll void the agreement," Daniel shouted, his desperation finally breaking through the corporate veneer. "We'll give you a new contract, anything." "I don't want a new contract, Daniel," I said. "I want to finish my coffee. It's a very good blend, manual press." I closed the door, not with a slam but with a soft, final click. 10 minutes later, Richard Hale called. He didn't leave a voicemail, he sent a text. It was typed in all caps, the digital equivalent of a tantrum. "Emma, if you don't answer, we will pursue legal action for sabotage. You intentionally WITHHELD the security protocols. This is a federal offense." I replied with a single sentence, my thumbs moving slowly and precisely. The protocols were clearly outlined in the documentation Jason refused to read. The hardware key is in my purse because it is my personal property. Please contact my lawyer for further inquiries. The sabotage threat was an empty one, and we both knew it. Sabotage requires an action, a deletion, a virus, a hack. I had simply performed an inaction. I had followed their orders to cease all intervention. I had given them exactly what they asked for, a world without Emma. By noon, the news had hit the financial wires. Vanguard Logistics shares plummet 15% amidst global system failure. The failure was cascading. Because the European ships were stalled, the trucks in the U.S. had nothing to pick up. Because the trucks had nothing to pick up, the warehouses were overflowing with outbound goods that had nowhere to go. The entire supply chain, a delicate web I had balanced for 15 years, was collapsing into a heap of expensive, stagnant metal. At 2 p.m., a black town car pulled into my driveway. Michael Reed, the CEO, stepped out. He was followed by Laura Mitchell from HR. Richard Hale was nowhere to be seen. I suspected he was currently in a different kind of meeting, one involving a cardboard box and a security escort. I met them on the porch. Michael Reed was a man who prided himself on his executive presence, but today he looked small. His skin was the color of old parchment. "Emma," he said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. He pulled it back, clearing his throat. "I think there has been a massive misunderstanding. A terrible, costly misunderstanding." "I don't think so, Michael," I said. "Richard was very clear I was a legacy cost, redundant, a relic of a manual era. Those were his words." "Richard was wrong," Michael said, his voice tight. "Richard has been terminated for cause, effective immediately, as has his son. We've discovered that several reports regarding the integration project were misrepresented to the board." "Is that so?" I asked. "I'm shocked." "Emma," Laura Mitchell stepped forward, her face a mask of practiced empathy. "We value you so much. We want you to come back. We'll double your previous salary. We'll give you the title of Chief Technology Officer. You'll report directly to Michael. No more Richard. No more optimization without your approval." I looked at Laura. I thought about the way she had looked away when I signed my termination papers. I thought about the way Daniel had looked at his notepad. I thought about the 15 years I had spent being the duct tape, while men like Richard took the bonuses and the credit. "The bridge is gone, isn't it?" I asked. Michael nodded, his shoulders slumped. "Jason tried to restore it using an AI tool. It corrupted the entire database schema. Our IT team says it will take 3 months to rebuild from scratch. We don't have 3 months. We have 3 hours before the board declares insolvency." "I have the bridge," I said. "I have the encrypted backup on my personal drive. I have the hardware key. I can have the ships moving in 20 minutes. Michael's eyes widened with hope. "Then let's go. My car is right here. We can have you logged in by 2:30. "I'm not going to the office, Michael," I said. "And I'm not becoming your CTO. I've grown quite fond of my garden." "Then what do you want?" he asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the company's survival. "I want $500,000, paid as a consulting fee for emergency system restoration," I said. "I want a public statement released to the entire company and the press, stating that the system failure was caused by the gross negligence of Richard and Jason Hale, and that I was brought in as an external expert to fix their mistakes. And I want a written guarantee that Vanguard will never contact me again once the bridge is restored." Michael didn't hesitate. He couldn't. He was a man watching his empire burn, and I was the only person with a bucket of water. "Done. Laura, get the paperwork ready on your phone. Emma, please just fix it." I went inside and grabbed my laptop. I sat at my kitchen table while the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company and his HR director stood on my porch like solicitors waiting for a handout. I logged into my personal cloud drive. I found the file, Vanguard Bridge Final Backup Stable Bin. I connected to the Vanguard server via a secure VPN. I didn't need their permission. I still had my backdoor admin credentials, the ones Jason had forgotten to revoke because he didn't even know they existed. I uploaded the schema. I ran the repair scripts. I took the RSA token from my purse, waited for the digits to roll over, and typed them into the EU Gateway's authentication portal. Authentication successful. IP range whitelisted. Connection restored. I watched the dashboard on my screen. The red lights began to blink, then turned a steady, beautiful green. The data started to flow. Manifests were being sent. Customs was clearing. The ships were moving. I closed my laptop and walked back to the porch. "It's done," I said. Michael Reed looked at his phone. He must have received a text from the operations center. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Thank you, Emma. Truly." "Don't thank me, Michael," I said. "I didn't do this for you. I did it because I built that system, and I didn't want to see a work of art destroyed by a man who couldn't tell the difference between a script and a spreadsheet." I looked at Laura. "You'll find my invoice in your inbox. I expect the wire transfer by the end of the day. If it's not there, I'll simply stop the intervention again, and next time I won't answer the door." The wire transfer arrived at 4:30 p.m. The public statement was released an hour later. It was brutal. It didn't just mention Richard and Jason, it laid the entire failure at their feet. It was a corporate execution. Richard Hale tried to sue me for extortion a month later. The case was laughed out of court before it even reached a judge. My consulting fee was a drop in the bucket compared to the $50 million Vanguard lost in port fees and client penalties. The court ruled that, as a private citizen and former employee, I was under no obligation to provide my personal property or expertise without a negotiated contract. Jason Hale, I heard, moved to another state to try and start a tech consultancy with his father. Last I checked, their website was a broken link. Arrogance, it seems, is a family trait that doesn't pay well in the long run. Vanguard Logistics survived, but it was a hollowed-out version of its former self. They lost their biggest pharmaceutical contract to a competitor, a company that had reached out to me for a security audit the week after the collapse. I declined the audit, but I appreciated the irony. I didn't take the CTO job. I didn't take any job. I used the $500,000 to buy a small piece of land on the coast. I spend my days watching the tide come in and out, a system that, thankfully, requires no manual intervention from me. It is the only architecture I care to maintain now. Occasionally, I get a call from a headhunter or a desperate CEO who has heard the legend of the woman who stopped the ships. I usually let them go to voicemail. I've had enough of corporate voices for one lifetime. I learned something important during those 15 years at Vanguard. I learned that in the world of high-stakes corporate power, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with the loudest voice or the biggest title. The most dangerous person is the one who knows how the world actually works and is willing to let the people who don't find out the hard way. Vanguard forgot that every machine has a soul, and that the soul is usually the person they've decided is redundant. They wanted a world of automation and agile growth, but they forgot that growth requires a foundation. And foundations are built by people like me, people who remember the manual era. I look at my phone now. It's silent. It's been silent for months. And in that silence, I found a peace that no executive VP title could ever provide. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't seek a fight. I simply stood back and allowed the consequences of other people's choices to manifest. I didn't raise my voice. I simply adjusted the system. If you found value in this story of corporate consequences, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's a quiet way to ensure these narratives reach those who need to hear them.